And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is Brewing with Underwhelming Commanders, episode 14. And starting out this week with Patron of the Orochi. 6 green, 7/7 spirit. Has Snake Offering, which means you may cast this card with flash by sacrificing a snake and paying the difference in mana costs. And then has a really powerful ability of tap and untap all forests and all green creatures. Play this ability only once each turn. So a couple of things to note here. First of all, because of the Snake Offering, you think, oh, well, this is a Snake Tribal deck. And yeah, maybe a little bit, but your commander isn't, right? This is actually a spirit, not a snake. So you're building sort of a Snake Tribal deck, even though your commander is not. Here, you're definitely going to want some snakes to get your commander out faster. I mean, 8 mana is a lot. We definitely don't want to have to pay that. And casting it with flash can also be a huge advantage. Another thing of note here, that ability is untap all forests and all green creatures, not just yours. That's your opponent's stuff as well, so you do have to be careful with that. So obviously we're going to just throw some snakes in here, like Lotus Cobra and Scourge Tribe Elder. They're just great cards anyway, right? There's a lot of snakes out there that you can just chuck in a deck that are just going to be really helpful, whether you're offering them to your commander or not. However, something like a 2-mana snake is not going to be great because our commander's still going to cost 6. I'd like to reduce it more than that. Jeweled Eyed Cobra is a good one. It's 3 mana, it's 3/1 with Death Touch, and it has when it dies, create a treasure token. So now we're getting advantage out of it dying, which is good. So now our commander will only cost 5. Orin Frostfang's a really good one. That's just a great card all around. Attacking creatures you control have Death Touch, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you get the draw card. So I guess we don't really want to sacrifice this, but if we do, our commander is now only going to cost 3 mana. That's really good. A couple other really good ones are Nemesis of Mortals and Honored Hydra. They both cost 6, and they both work as well. Honored Hydra has Embalm, 3 and a green, so after we sacrifice it, we can get it back from our graveyard, which is good. Nemesis of Mortals costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. So this is going to be ideal where we'll probably have a couple creatures in our graveyard. So this guy's not going to cost 6. He's only going to cost maybe 4. And then our commander, when we sacrifice him, is going to cost only 2, which is really ideal. I would also throw in Sakiko, Mother of Summer, and Sashiro the Anointed. Sakiko is a 6-mana snake. So that, again, is going to reduce your cost of your commander by quite a bit. And whenever your creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you add that much green mana to your mana pool. This mana does not empty as phases end, so that's going to be pretty good. This is going to be obviously more of an aggro deck. Shiro is going to give all your snakes +2/+2. Remember, our commander is not a snake. However, all of the other snakes in the deck will get +2/+2, and whenever they deal damage to a player, we get the draw card. Also, again, cost 6, so it's going to reduce the cost of our commander by quite a bit. You can also throw some of those Changeling cards. They have every creature type, so Chameleon Colossus and Litjara Glade Warden are both good, and are both going to reduce our commander to only 4. Sereth, the Viper's Fang from Innistrad Midnight Hunt, which I really love this card a lot. I think it's a great commander, and it's also fantastic in the 99 of a lot of decks, this being one of them. Obviously, because hey, giving our commander hexproof or death touch is pretty darn good, but also untapping our commander is going to be really, really good as well. So again, this similar, we have to pay the 1 mana, but guess what? All of our forests are untapping, so that's not going to be an issue. A few other creatures that would be great to be untapping, Circle of Dreams Druid or Somber Walled Sage, are going to give us mana. They're great to untap so we can use them again. I like Glissa in this deck because it's going to be able to destroy artifacts. Elvish Piper is going to be great. You can just pay 1 green and tap and put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. That's pretty fantastic. How about Yisan the Wanderer Bard? That's a fantastic creature to be untapping all the time. And then, of course, remember, our forest and our mana dorks are also untapping, so we're basically going to be able to use his ability on every single person's turn. And I just think Gargantuan Gorilla is a really funny, interesting card to put in this deck. It is 7 mana, yes, but it's a 7/7 ape, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice a forest. If you sacrifice a snow forest this way, Gargantuan Gorilla gains trample until end of turn. I guess that's okay. If you don't, it deals 7 damage to you. That's not great. So you got to sacrifice a forest on your upkeep. However, you tap Gargantuan Gorilla and it deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. That creature deals damage equal to its power to Gargantuan Gorilla, also known as fighting. So every single time we're tapping our Patron of the Orochi, we basically are killing a creature. I mean, this is a 7/7. Even though it costs 7 mana, it has that upkeep. upkeep. This is every single opponent's turn. We should be able to kill one of their creatures. That seems pretty fantastic. Duskwatch Recruiter can also be fantastic in here. You know, any mana sink can be fantastic because we're going to be untapping both our forests and our mana dorks all the time. Paying 3 mana to look at the top 3 cards of your library and putting a creature card into your hand, I think that's pretty darn good. And Helix Pinnacle, that can be a win con for this deck. You know, I think probably you're just going to be attacking with your green creatures like you do in most green decks. But if you want an alt win con, Helix Pinnacle is an interesting one that you can just dump all that extra mana that you're probably going to be having a lot into it and putting those tower counters on it. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 100 or more tower counters, you just win the game. So that's a great alt win con for a patron of the Orochi deck. Definitely an interesting commander. Is it underwhelming? I'd say it is, because it's expensive, even though you can cheat that mana cost. That ability is really good, although it also works for your opponents, so you got to be careful there, right? But moving on to number 2 this week, which is Zirilan of the Claw. And it's actually, you know, it was a tie, to be quite honest. Patron of the Orochi and Zirilan of the Claw were tied for 2nd and 3rd place, so I just put them in this order. Really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Zirilan of the Claw, I think, is just a great commander. I actually did a deck doctor for one of my patrons recently with him, and I just think it's fantastic. 3 red, Viashino Shaman, 3/4. Pay 1 red, and tap, search your library for a dragon permanent card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. That dragon gains haste until end of turn, exile it at the beginning of the next end step. This was a really popular commander back in the day, really has fallen off in popularity. And again, just like I talked about in my tutors video, this is another one of those commanders that it's a tutor. It's a fantastic commander because it allows you to go get things out of your library and put them directly into play. That's a really great ability. Obviously, we're going to want a lot of dragons in this deck, right? Like Balefire Dragon, Drakuseth's a great one. You know, our dragons get haste. They get to attack right away, so you're going to get that Drakuseth trigger immediately. Balefire Dragon, you could probably easily get in for damage with it right away. Turns it into a board wipe, essentially. And that is, you know, how I would build this deck. You know, you get dragons that are basically solutions to problems. Thunder Dragon is going to deal 3 damage to each creature without flying when it enters the battlefield, so it's essentially a board wipe. I mean, you're only paying 3 mana for this, not 7. Spawn of Thraxes, when it enters the battlefield, deals 1 damage to any target for each mountain you control, right? So again, you're using it as a removal. Yeah, you can swing with it, but you can also use it as, I just get it out of my library because my opponent has a pesky creature that I want to get rid of. Hellkite Tyrant's great. That's your way of dealing with artifacts, essentially. It can attack right away, and when you connect with an opponent, you get to gain control of all their artifacts. Also has that alt win con on it, which can be good. World Gorger Dragon is a really interesting one. Typically, you see this in those infinite combos where you end up ending the game with it. But in here, it's just a way to protect our stuff. When it enters the battlefield, you exile all other permanents you control, your commander, everything, lands, you name it. And when it leaves the battlefield, you return them to play. So what happens is, if my opponents are going to board wipe, let's say they're just casting a Wrath of God, I go quickly grab my World Gorger Dragon out of my library. With your Zirilan, World Gorger Dragon comes into play, exiles all my stuff, the Wrath of God kills my World Gorger Dragon, and all my stuff comes back into play, and it basically saves my creatures. If your opponent is going to cast something that, I don't know, like a Worldfire, which got unbanned recently, this is a great way to respond to that, and, you know, pretty much you win the game if that's the case. I guess you could also throw Worldfire in this deck for that reason and use it as sort of a win con, where I go get my World Gorger Dragon out of my library in response to casting my own Worldfire. It is definitely an option if you want to go that way. Steelkite Tyrant's a great one. Again, I had this in my colorless removal video for that reason. When it connects, you can pay X and destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X. So that's a fantastic way to deal with things, especially in a mono red deck where, you know, enchantments in particular, you can have issues dealing with that. Obsidian Charmok can deal with lands. In particular, though, we want to keep those dragons in play or reuse them again, right? Because we don't want them just coming into play, using them once, and then them getting exiled. That's no good. We want to be able to use them again. So having sack outlets in the deck is always going to be great. Shivan Harvest is a personal favorite of mine that I mentioned on my 10 cards videos. Sacrifice a creature, destroy target non-basic land. So that dragon comes into play, and as long as we sacrifice it before that trigger goes on the stack and resolves, it won't get exiled. It'll just go to the graveyard, and having those creatures in our graveyard is better than just having them exiled. You could throw a card like Junk Troller in there where you can put a card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. This is graveyard hate. We can use it on our opponents as well. So that's one way to get around it. I think a better way to get around it is a card like Telgiad Stylus, 1 mana artifact, and you just tap it to put target permanent you own on the bottom of your library. So any of those dragons dragons that come into play, like our Drakuseth. It comes in, we swing with it, we deal a bunch of damage, we connect with our opponents, and then as soon as that is all over and done with, we tuck it on the bottom of our library, and we can just do it again next turn if we want. Rishadan Pawn Shop is another way we can do this. Pay 2 mana and tap to shuffle a non-token permanent we own into our library, and then we can just use that dragon we want again if needed. Sundial of the Infinite will just shut it off, right? I'm sure everyone is familiar with this in a lot of different decks where I can just pay 1 and end the turn. You just have to be careful with it though, because the trigger says exile at the beginning of the next end step. So if you do it right away, that trigger won't happen because there's no end step on your turn. But then on the next player's turn, when the next end step, whoever's next end step it is, that dragon will get exiled. So what you want to do it properly is wait till that triggers on the stack, and then you use your Sundial of the Infinite, and it removes that ability from the stack. Conjurer's Closet is another way to do this. At the beginning of your end step, you can exile a creature you control and then put it back onto the battlefield, so you're blinking that dragon. Reality Scramble's a really interesting way to get around this. 2 red sorcery, put target permanent you own on the bottom of your library. Reveal cards from top of your library until you reveal a card that shares a type with that permanent. Put it onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in random order, and it has retrace. So what we can do, we can cheat one of those dragons into play, like our Balefire Dragon, use its ability, and then on our second main phase, we cast this. Because it's going to get exiled anyway, we tuck it back on the bottom of our library so we can use it again, and we'll maybe get a free dragon out of the deal. That'd be great. You could also throw a Sneak Attack or a Perforos Bronze Blooded in this deck to just, again, sort of do what our commander is doing, except instead of our library, we're doing it directly from our hand. I think Elena is a great fit in this deck. You just tap her to add an amount of red equal to the greatest power among creatures you control that entered the battlefield this turn. There's a lot of big creatures entering the battlefield in this deck, so if we throw our Drakuseth in play, now we can tap Elena to add 7 mana. That's pretty fantastic. Feldon is just an auto include in this deck. Feldon and a Zirilan deck are very similar, where Zirilan is cheating him into play from your library and Feldon is making copies from your graveyard, so you just want them to be in your graveyard first. So the sack effect works really good here, where I can put that giant scary dragon into play, sacrifice it after I'm done with it, and then Feldon can now take advantage of it now that it's in the graveyard. Molten Echoes is just super fantastic here. 2 red enchantment as Molten Echoes enter the battlefield. Choose a creature type. So we're going to choose dragon, obviously. When a non-token creature of that type enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So again, it's doing a similar effect to what our commander's doing. We're just getting an extra copy. So that Balefire Dragon comes into play. Now we can make a copy of it, attack 2 different players, wipe their whole boards. Fantastic fit in this deck. Man, there's just a lot you can do here. I think this is a fantastic commander, Zirilan of the Claw. Really great. I'm really surprised it's not more popular. Again, searching your library for stuff and putting it directly into play is a incredibly powerful ability, and the exile at the beginning of the next end step is a really easy workaround. It's really not that hard to get around that ability. But coming in at number 1 this week by quite a wide margin, and I think because it is recent, it seems to be whenever I put newer commanders in these lists, they win by a mile, probably because people have them, right? People have cracked these commanders open in packs and they don't really know what to do with them. Quintorius Field Historian is the winner this week. 3 red and a white Elephant Cleric. 2/4. Spirits you control get +1/+0. Okay, so we're already in sort of a spirit tribal deck. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So, bit of a graveyard theme, bit of a spirit theme, neither of which is typical for Boros, but as we all know, in Strixhaven, they sort of went a different direction with the color combinations. I think it's great recursion theme. Doing recursion in Boros, again, not typical, but there is surprisingly a lot of ways to do it. White is actually pretty good at recursion if you're staying with the low converted mana cost. As long as you stay with a low CMC, white is actually really good at that. So every time we get one of those creatures out of our graveyard and return to the battlefield, we're getting a 3/2 spirit on top of it, which I guess is going to be a 4/2 if our commander's in play, right? Abiding Grace is great this way. Really underrated card, I think, from Modern Horizons 2. 2 and a white enchantment at the beginning of your end step. Choose 1. You gain 1 life or return target creature with mana value 1 from your graveyard to the battlefield. I really like these cards that you can play and then they trigger immediately at your end step, so you get to use them right away. This is only a creature with mana value 1, but we're gonna put lots of creatures in here with a mana value of 1. Idol of Endurance is a great one. 2 and a white artifact. When Idol of Endurance enters the battlefield, exile all creature cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard until it leaves the battlefield. And then we can pay 1 and a white and tap until end of turn you may cast a creature spell from among the cards exiled without paying its mana cost. We're going to have lots of those creatures in our graveyard, right? So this comes into play, exiles them all. Our commander will give us 1 spirit token because this is a 1 or more trigger, but then we get to cast a bunch of them. Custody Soulcaller and Order of White Clay both are going to get, again, smaller creatures. These are repeatable recursion effects, which is great, but it just is limiting us to smaller creatures, right? Whenever Custody Soulcaller attacks, return target creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of players you attacked with a creature this combat. So you're going to attack at least 1 because Custody Soulcaller is attacking. So that means I get to get a 1 mana value. If I attack 2 opponents, I get 2 mana value. Probably you're maxing out at 3, but that's okay. Order of White Clay also is going to get mana value of 3 or less from your graveyard and just return it to play. It has that not often seen untap ability, so you got to get it tapped somehow before you can use that ability. Typically you can just attack with it, and then after it attacks you can untap it to return something to play. Rally the Ancestors and Return to the Ranks are both fantastic this way. Return to the Ranks returns creatures with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and Rally the Ancestors is X or less, but it's going to return all of them. So if we pay 3 mana, it's going to return all of our 1 mana value creatures to play. And also, because we're in this constant recursion theme where we have this repeatable recursion, we have a lot of sack effects and sacrifice creatures, right? So that we can bring those creatures back into play, sacrifice them to some other effect, or sacrifice them to themselves so that they won't get exiled at the beginning of the next upkeep. Trove Warden, Venerable Warsinger, there's actually a lot of these effects if you look for them. Trove Warden, again, is going to get those permanent cards with mana value 3 or less. So as long as we stay 3 or below, we can really get a lot of stuff here. Venerable Warsinger, when it deals combat damage to a player, you may return target creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of damage it has dealt to that player. We're a 3/3 with trample here, so probably 3 or less. So again, we're fitting that same theme. Tashar, again, 3 or less. So you can see the sort of theme that's happening here. Sun Titan, 3 or less. Very common in white. And then Underworld Breach is just going to be a fantastic card all around. Each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to its mana cost, plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. So this is going to be great. Getting stuff out of our graveyard, but also works great with our commander, where every time we escape something, we're triggering our commander and getting a 3/2 token. And like I said, we're going to chuck a bunch of creatures in here that we can keep reusing, right? Alseid of Life's Bounty, Benevolent Bodyguard. They're 1 mana creatures that we can get back with any of our effects that we can then sacrifice to use them to protect our stuff. Bloodfire Dwarf, we can sacrifice to deal 1 damage to each creature without flying. Mog Fanatic, we can sacrifice to deal 1 damage to any target. I know it doesn't seem like much, but remember, we're going to keep getting them back over and over and over again. We more want the trigger from our commander. We want creatures that are going to be cheap, that we can constantly be getting back. We can sacrifice them so that we can get them back again. We can keep making spirits with our commander. That's sort of the whole, it's a value engine, right? And of course, we can just throw in fantastic 1 mana creatures like Esper Sentinel and Sarah Ascendant. They're just great creatures. But also, because they cost 1 mana, we can get them back out of the graveyard with our Abiding Grace or any of our other effects. Ranger of Eos is going to be great because when it enters the battlefield, we can search our library for up to 2 creature cards with converted mana cost 1 or less and put them into our hand. So now we can go get any of those creatures that we want. Selfless Spirit, Remorseful Cleric are some 2 mana creatures. Again, just creatures that are going to be great in the deck. We can definitely be using these abilities, making our team indestructible or exiling an opponent's graveyard. Both very usable effects. And again, we cast that Rally the Ancestors, bring them back into play, and before they get exiled, we use their ability. Then we can bring them back with something else, like our Venerable Warsinger. We could just keep doing it over and over and over again. We want creatures in this deck that we can sacrifice to put in our graveyard so that we can keep getting them back with these effects that we have. Brought Back is another way you can do this, and it's going to be slingshotting our creatures back into play, but also when we do that slingshot effect, we get that spirit token that we want. We can also just exile stuff from our graveyard with a card like Apostle of Purifying Light. 1 and a white human cleric, has protection from black, is a 2/1, and you can pay 2 and exile target card from a graveyard. That's it. So with our commander in play, this just becomes pay 2 mana, create a 3/2 spirit. That's it. We can just exile any card from our graveyard, and probably probably not the creatures, because the creatures we're going to want in there that we can get back, we're going to exile the other stuff, the lands, artifacts, instant sorceries, whatever the case may be. And every time we do that, we get a spirit token. So that's going to be great in the deck as well. Stonebound Mentor and Fuming Effigy. These are obviously the cards that came in Strixhaven that fit with this theme of whenever cards leave our graveyard, we're going to get the scry 1 or deal 1 damage to each opponent. So they're going to be great fits, obviously. Lorehold Excavation also fits here as well. Red and a white enchantment at the beginning of your end step. Mill a card. If a land card was milled this way, you gain 1 life. Otherwise, Lorehold Excavation deals 1 damage to each opponent. So milling ourselves is good. We do want to be getting stuff out of our graveyard, so dumping stuff in our graveyard is okay. We can also pay 5, exile a creature card from our graveyard, and create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So obviously that fits as well. And when we do it, if we have our commander in play, we'll obviously get another one of those spirit tokens as well. And of course, they're going to get +1/+0. And if Joffrey Ghostforge is in play, they're also going to get +1/+1 and have trample and haste. So obviously he's got to go in this deck as well. So all of the spirits that we are making now with our commander are now going to be 5/3s with trample and haste. That is very formidable. And then Joffrey's second ability really fits what we're doing. Again, because we have all those creatures that we're sacrificing over and over and over, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a spirit in addition to its other types. When this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to owner's graveyard. So obviously, not by mistake, these cards fit perfectly together, Quintorius and Joffrey. We sacrifice our Selfless Spirit, for example, to make our team indestructible. It is going to hit the graveyard and then get exiled by Joffrey. So Joffrey's ability is going to trigger Quintorius's ability, because that is a creature card that is leaving our graveyard, because it is actually going to hit the graveyard before it gets exiled. So we get a spirit token for that. We also get the token copy of the Selfless Spirit. Then when we sacrifice it again, it'll go back to the graveyard so that we can then get it back with one of our other recursion effects. Obviously, Joffrey is just an absolute perfect fit in this deck. This is a really super value-y deck, the kind of decks that I really like, which is why I was thinking about making it anyway. It is very similar to the Joffrey deck that I had already made, except with Joffrey, I did sort more of an artifact theme with it. With Quintorius, I just went with a straight recursion theme. You know, it is a little bit off color, which is also kind of fun. It's kind of fun to make off color themes, and doing a recursion theme in Boros is obviously not something you see every day. So really interesting deck. The deck list for this commander is in the description below as usual. And as usual, the poll for the next Underwhelming Commanders video is in the description as well. Please go vote, and we will see which commanders get decks in the next Underwhelming Commanders episode. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.